will begin. We would like to request you to please pay attention and set your Zoom settings view into speaker view. And once again, please be reminded to mute your audio during the conference. Thank you. First, we would like to greet the Honorable Rector of Diponegoro University, Professor Dr. Yos Johan Utama SH.M. Hum, the Vice Rector 1, Professor Budi Setiono Esos Empol Admin PhD, the Vice Rector 2, Professor Dr. Renat Heru Susanto STM MMT, the Vice Rector 3, Dwi Cahyo Utomo SEMA PhD, the Vice Rector 4, Professor Dr. Insinyur Ambarianto Master of Science, the Dean at School of Postgraduate Studies Diponegoro University, Dr. RB Sularto SH.M. Hum, the Vice Dean for Academics and Student Affairs at School of Postgraduate Studies Diponegoro University, Professor Dr. Hadianto ST Master of Science, the Vice Dean for Resources and Innovation at School of Postgraduate Studies Diponegoro University, Professor Dr. Tri Retnaningsi Suprabawati Master of Applied Science, the Honorable our keynote speakers, Professor Elko van Berg from University of Amsterdam, Goedemorgen, Professor Peter Gel from Federation University Australia, good morning, Professor Jerry Miller from Western Carolina, USA, welcome. Dr. Yurdi Yasmi from International Rice Research Institute, IRRI, selamat pagi Pak. Dr. Liu Kian Heng from Liu Strategic Singapore, welcome. Professor Sabir H. Jiwala from King Mongkut's University of Technology, Thonburi, Thailand, sawadika. Dr. Nuki Agiautama as a Director of Energy ASEAN, selamat datang Bapak. Dr. Zainul Akmar Zakaria from University Technology Malaysia, Malaysia, welcome. Dr. Patrick Bamsengyo from Eindhoven University of Technology, Netherlands, Goedemorgen. Baroka Sri Utami MSI as a former President Director PT Papros Indonesia, selamat datang Ibu. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Welcome to this webinar for the 5th International Conference on Energy, Environment, Epidemiology and Information System ICENIS 2020. My name is Stephanie and I will be the Master of Ceremony for this event. The Honorable, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, prior to the opening session, the Indonesian national anthem will be performed. I would like to request everyone to please rise. Thank you and kindly be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, our first program in the opening ceremony are welcome remarks. First of all, kindly be invited to deliver the welcome remarks Chairman of the 5th ICENIS, Professor Dr. Hadianto, ST Master of Science.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Director and all Vice Rectors of Universitas Diponegoro, all Deans of Faculty and School at Diponegoro University, especially the Dean of School of Honorable keynote speakers, guests, all moderators, presenters, and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of our distinguished conference speakers, presenters, and participants to the 5th International Conference on Energy, Environment, Epidemiology, and Information Systems 2020. It is an ongoing effort by the School of Postgraduate Studies, Diponegoro University, starting from the first in 2016. This conference is mainly aimed to provide a sharing platform that enables researchers, academics, and practitioners to share their best practice, which have been produced through research, as well as to propose the best strategy in the area of energy, environment, epidemiology, and information systems. The previous conference is always conducted by offline, and due to the pandemic occurrence of COVID-19, we decided this year to have this conference still possible via online conference. Indeed, this is the first time for arranging this online conference meeting. However, surprisingly, the online system did not decrease the interest of the participants to join this conference. This year, we are receiving more than 300 submissions, which is the largest number since the ICENIS conference history. This is because our successful experience in handling this conference, including the delivering high-quality keynote speakers and fast handling of publication in Scopus Index Proceeding and Journal. Honorable speakers and guests, Honorable speaker and guests, this year we have 10 keynote speakers from various backgrounds. Prof. Elko van Burg from Amsterdam University, Prof. Jerry Miller from Western Carolina University, USA, Professor Peter Jell from Federation University, Australia, Dr. Yurdi Yasmi, Regional Representative of IRRI, Prof. Sabir Khiwala from King Mongkut University, Thailand, Dr. Patrick van Scheidel from Technical University, Eindhoven, Dr. Nuki Akia Utama as ASEAN Center of Energy, Director of ASEAN Center of Energy, Baroka Sri Utrami, former President Director of PT Vapros Indonesia, and Dr. Liu Tin Heng from Strategic Singapore. Those keynote speakers will provide us valuable talks through this conference under main topics of emphasizing environment and human security towards Global Sustainable Development Goals 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future human security. They address the global challenge we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. The 17 goals are interconnected, and in order to leave no one behind, it is important that we achieve them all by 2030. Therefore, our conference topic is very relevant to this statement by United Nations. Honorable speaker and guests, our accepted 300 article will be published in Scopus Index Proceeding and Journal of Energy, Environment, and Earth System web of conference, which is our partner since 4 years ago. And the selected article will be published in International Journal of Renewable Energy Development. Last but not at least, I hope ICENIS 2020 will increase research collaborations between researcher and institution involved. I would like to express blessed gratitude to our Diponegoro University for their support to this conference, and also a heartfelt wish to all the committee involved in this conference. Without you, ICENIS 2020 will not be a reality. Representing the organizer, I proudly welcome all of you to the ICENIS 2020, wishing all participants fruitful and memorable experience for this today's conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Hadianto, ST Master of Science, for the welcome remarks. Following next, there will be a welcoming speech delivered by the Dean at School of Postgraduate Studies, Diponegoro University. Please welcome Dr. RB Sularto, SHM Hum.
Ya, mesinnya udah keluar ya.
Thank you, Stefani. The Honorable Rector of Diponegoro University, Professor Johan Utama, all the Vice Rector, and the Dean of all faculties in Diponegoro University, the Honorable keynote speakers, Professor Ellen van Berg from University of Amsterdam, Professor Peter Gil from Federation University Australia, Professor Jerry Miller from Western Carolina, USA, Dr. Yudi Yasmi from International Research Institute, Dr. Liu Kian Heng from Liu Strategis, Singapore, Professor Sabir Gewala from King Mongkut University of Technology, Thonburi, Thailand, Dr. Nuki Agia Utama, Director of Energy ASEAN, Dr. Zainul Akmar Zakaria from UTM Malaysia, Dr. Patrick van Seyder from TU Eindhoven, Netherlands, and Barokah Sri Utami MSc, Managing Director PT Papros Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, on behalf of School of Postgraduate Studies Diponegoro University, I would like to give our welcome to all participants, experts, and scholars coming today to 5th International Conference on Energy, Environmental Epidemiology, and Information System. This conference is one of the important academic events that held by School of Postgraduate Studies Diponegoro University regularly, and this conference is the 5th conference that held by online. The participants include our colleagues from several provinces, which means not only from Central Java province, and come from all Indonesian region and few from all over the world. The participant that registered comes from Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem that challenge us today is about pandemic COVID-19. One of the areas that we have been continuing to study is the origin of the virus that causes COVID-19. Epidemiological study has been begun in Wuhan to identify the potential source of infection of the early cases. Evidence and hypotheses generated through this work will lay the ground for further longer-term studies. At the time of COVID-19, especially when there is disruption to health service, country experience like New Zealand is good lesson for us. Country like New Zealand has delivered the country strategy was based on speedy testing, contact tracing, and isolation, while rigorous adhering to public health guidance. New Zealand recognized the very critical role that WHO plays in public health emergencies and has valued its global and regional leadership and the sharing of information and expertise through the response to COVID-19. We hope our conference will discuss some topic like this issue. In conclusion, I thank to the speakers and participants who will deliver their interesting idea in the area of environmental, energy, epidemiology, and information system. Besides, I welcome you recommendation to further the development of poverty reduction in Indonesia and over the world, especially the decreasing of COVID-19 pandemic. Wish the conference complete success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. R.B. Sularto SHM for the speech. The honorable, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we are going to have an opening remarks by the representative of Rector of Diponegoro University and will officially open the event. Highly invited to deliver the opening remarks, the Vice Rector for Academics and Student Affairs, Professor Budi Setiono, SOS MPhil Admin, PhD. Please give a big applause.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Honorable keynote speakers, all conference guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Rector Diponegoro University, I would like to thank to all the participants who already joined this conference. It is an honor, great honor to me to welcome you to the 5th International Conference on Energy, Environment, Epidemiology, and Environment Information System, the 5th ICENIS 2020. This is the 5th international conference organized by the School of Postgraduate Studies, Diponegoro University, following the success of the first ICENIS 2016, second ICENIS 2017, third ICENIS 2018, and fourth ICENIS 2019. With its remarkable accomplishment, this event is expected to be performed annually, and we always very much support this prestigious conference, which is always attended by more than 200 participants, including today's conference. As you know, Diponegoro University, or Undip, is a prominent university located in Semarang, Central Java. And Undip has a strong tradition to carry out education and research, as well as community services. The university has 11 faculties and 2 schools, which are School of Postgraduate Studies and School of Vocational Studies. And we are also organizing 49 undergraduate programs, 39 master degree programs, and 14 doctoral programs. And Undip is also one of the most well-known state universities in Indonesia, with an international reputation for its teaching and also research activities. In July 2020, for example, Undip is ranked as the 8th in Indonesia according to QS World University Ranking, and also ranked 9th in Indonesia by the QS ASEAN University Ranking. Undip scientific publication is indexed in Scopus with a total number of 5,892 documents, and it's ranked as a 6th in Indonesia as per 31 January 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, and also all the speakers, the topic of this year conference is emphasizing environment and human security towards Global Sustainable Development Goal, SDGs 2030, This topic is very important because human security has been considered as the basic need or for all human beings and also for a country. The security in food, energy, water, as well as health are the foundation of every country in the world. So that's every country must ensure that these needs are covered and secured for all its citizens. Currently, however, sadly, we are a major health problem which needs to be tackled by every single country in the world. It is our responsibility to develop better the situation and recover all the activities as human being. And I hope this conference will contribute an excellent platform to strengthen our concern and efforts in confirming sustainable development for future security and human being. Through this conference, I hope experts and researchers from all over the world could meet together and share their experiences and knowledge to have explicit understanding regarding the complexity of the problems. I also hope this conference will present a memorable learning experience to all contributors and also participants. It is expected that all that papers presented in this conference are documented for our future reference and encourage further research in relevant areas. Thank you very much and happy conference. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Professor Budi Setiono, SOS MPhil Admin PhD, for the opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, to carry on the event, we will have our keynote speakers on hand. We will be listening to Professor Airku from University of Amsterdam, Professor Peter Gell from Federation University Australia, Professor Jerry Miller from Western Carolina, USA, Dr. Yurdi Yasmi from International Rice Research Institute, IRRI, and Dr. Liu Kian Heng from Liu Strategics, Singapore. First, let me introduce the moderator. His name is Professor Sudarto P. Hadi. He is a professor in environmental management at Diponegoro University. He got his bachelor degree from Faculty of Social and Political Sciences Diponegoro University and continued master degree in environmental studies at York University, Toronto, Canada. In 1993, he completed PhD in School of Community and Regional Planning from University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. He did many researches and his research focuses on environmental management in public and private sector, focuses on social impact assessment. Please welcome the moderator, Professor Sudarto P. Hadi.
Thank you, Stephen, our MC. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wow.
May God always bless us and hope you are all in good health and high spirit. Honorable Vice Dean, Honorable Vice Rector for Academic and Student Affairs, Honorable Dean, Vice Dean, School of Graduate Studies, Honorable the Chairman of Senate of Diponegoro University, all speaker, participant. My name is Sudarto P. Hadi. It is a great honor to be here, to be a moderator of plenary session of 5th ICENIS, International Conference on Energy, Environment, Epidemiology, and Information System. Welcome to plenary session. We will have 5 speakers with a variety of academic background and variety of topics. event pandemic COVID-19 around us, we are now still work, and we hope that we are being secure and still productive by following health protocol. I will invite all speakers to present their topic and continue with discussion or question and answer. In the meantime, I cordially invite all participants to raise question, comment through Zoom chatting. Inshallah will be responded by speaker. Let us start with the first speaker. On the agenda, on the list of agenda, the first speaker is supposed to be Professor Airku van Berg, but due to of different time, he is from Amsterdam, and right now Amsterdam is still 4 o'clock early in the morning. So we will invite Professor Jerry Miller instead. And Professor Airku will be the last speaker. Each speaker will have 20 minutes for presentation. So, Professor Jerry, the viral room is yours, 20 minutes for you. And as you take a look at the screen, this is Professor Jerry Miller. He is Professor of Environmental Science. Could you show the CV of Professor Miller, please? Yes. Yes. Okay, and you can take a look. The education, working experience, and research focus is on water, sediment quality, hydrology, river geomorphology, river restoration. That will be interesting for us. So, Professor Jerry Miller, the topic that will be shared with us is geomorphic framework for the analysis of microplastic in riverine sediment. Professor Miller, please.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Professor Hadi, for that introduction. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Okay.
Clear.
So I want to take the opportunity here in the beginning to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to this conference. Wish we could all be together and be able to meet one another, but such is life during a time of global pandemic. As you saw from my CV, my resume there, most of my work has actually been conducted on heavy metals and the transport and fate of other toxic contaminants in river systems. And about a year ago, a colleague of mine came and asked that I work with them on a project dealing with plastics, and particularly microplastics in river systems. And microplastics, as we'll see, are defined as plastic particles less than about 5 millimeters in maximum diameter. What we recognized early on is that microplastics have a lot in common with the transport of heavy metals in river systems. And so what I thought I would do during this presentation is give you an overview of what we currently know about microplastics in rivers, which is not very much, and then discuss really what how we can use a geomorphic framework which has been developed over the past 5 or 6 decades to look at other types of sediment-bound contaminants and apply that information to microplastics. Okay, so we're all familiar with plastics in general. We use them in our everyday life. Their use stems from the fact that they can be molded into a wide variety of shapes. They can be formulated so that they have a wide variety of different weights, strengths, durability, chemical reactivity, and melting points and so forth. So this makes them incredibly useful from a manufacturing perspective. We use them in everything from packaging to automobiles to clothing, ropes, fishing nets, and so forth. Chemically, plastics are essentially a synthetic polymer. There's about 20 different groups of these polymers, but 7 make up about 92% of all the polymers which are currently used. And you can see some of these on the slide here. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, historically, synthetic polymers were first created in the late 1800s, but their manufacture on an industrial scale didn't begin in the 1950s. And it increased from about 2 metric tons per year in 1950 up to about 400 metric tons per year in 2017. The growth is about 8.4% per year. It's truly exponential at this time. And you can see from the graph in the lower part of the slide here that a lot of that growth is occurring in Africa, in Asia, and in parts of the Middle East, as well as other countries as well. Now, since the 1950s, there's been about 5,800 metric tons of plastics produced in total. About 30% of that is still in use, which is pretty good. But about 70% of all plastics produced have been either disposed of in landfills or released to the environment. So it's an enormous amount of plastics which are floating around somewhere in either the terrestrial or aquatic environments. Next slide, please. Now, the potential impacts of plastics in the environment has primarily been conducted to date in marine settings. We knew that this was a problem back in the 1970s, but it really wasn't until the 1990s that we began to take a much more detailed quantitative look at it. And then since that time, probably 90% or more of the work that's been done has focused on oceanic or coastal regions. The data to date on the amount of plastics in the ocean is quite variable, but some modeling studies suggest that about 5 trillion tons of plastic is currently, 5 trillion pieces of plastic is currently floating around in the oceans. And this may weigh as much as about 250,000 tons. Okay, so next slide. Now, in spite of the fact that about 80% of the plastics in the oceans may be derived from river systems, there's been very little study on plastics in rivers to date. In fact, the first study of microplastics in riverine sediments was conducted in 2014. It was a study by Castaneda et al. In the St. Lawrence River system. So this is a really new, rapidly developing field. What we do know is that almost every freshwater system that's been studied to date, including rivers, has very high concentrations of plastics within them. And the concentrations are often on par with what we find in many marine sediments. As an example, Klein et al. In 2015 studied the River Tame in the UK and reported a value of 517,000 plastic items per square meter in the riverbed sediments. This is some of the highest values ever reported for rivers. So the point here is that most river systems, lake systems, even those in remote areas, have fairly measurable concentrations of plastic within it, which is very similar to, or maybe even exceeding those what we find in the oceans. Okay, next slide. Now, plastics in oceanic environments, as well as other aquatic environments, are typically characterized in terms of 3 primary parameters: the size, their shape, and their composition, and to a lesser degree, their color. We're going to focus in on microplastics that you see here. These are particles less than 5 millimeters in size. The reason for this is that these particles are readily ingested by biota and are thought to be one of the most important in terms of causing biological impacts. You can also see the most common types of plastics that we find in riverine environments here, things like polyethylene, polypropylene, polyvinyl chloride, and polystyrene, and there's some others as well. And they come in a wide variety of shapes, beads, fibers, fragments, foams, pellets, and so forth. So they're quite diverse within the aquatic environment. Next slide. Now, in most cases, plastics are really divided in terms of their source into two broad categories. One is a primary plastic or primary sources. These include microbeads associated with cosmetics and cosmetic materials and facial products, such as you see in the lower left-hand corner there, till about 2015, when a lot of these products were banned in many countries. These microbeads could be disposed of in wastewater, make it to a wastewater treatment plant, but a small portion, maybe 2 to 3% of those beads would make it through the wastewater treatment plant and be released into river systems. It also includes things like plastic pellets, which were used in the production of other plastic materials. Secondary sources are essentially plastic materials which have been degraded and broken into pieces. So these are from essentially things like bottles which have been broken up and fragmented and then released into the environment. It also includes fibers of polyester and acrylic fibers from clothing that might be removed from that clothing during washing, and those can also make it into wastewater treatment plants and be released into the environment. So in a nutshell, we have these primary sources and then these secondary sources, which really represents the breakdown of other types of plastic materials after the plastic items have been used. And then over here, we have a series of places where the release points where those types of plastics might be released into a river system. Okay, next slide. Now, we really don't have a lot of data yet on the potential impacts, biological or ecological impacts of microplastics on biota. There's some arguments, some investigators have argued that the data that we do have is primarily based on concentrations which are unrealistically high and focus on a relatively small number of materials or sizes and shapes. And so there's still a lot to be done with in terms of trying to understand what the ecological impacts are. Now, having said that, there's good reasons to suggest that microplastics can cause some pretty significant impacts ecologically and perhaps even in terms of human health. One of the probably leading reasons, most straightforward reason, is that microplastics can be ingested, where it can cause damage to organs such as gills. It can block the intestinal tracts, and it, by stressing the organism, can also lead to a variety of other impacts such as loss in growth rates. We know that to date, plastics have been found in about 220 different species of biota. So this is a fairly wide problem. This is a picture that's kind of gone global here, viral, if you will, where all of these plastic particles that you see next to that turtle was actually within that turtle. So the ingestions can be quite high in some environments. We also know that once ingested, there appears to be a chance that these particles can be biomagnified, that they can be transferred across trophic levels. And so that's certainly a concern. In addition, a lot of the plastics contain toxic substances such as plasticizers, antioxidants, stabilizers, and so forth. So the plastics themselves might contain contaminated particles, and the surface of the plastics tend to be electrically charged. And are actually able to absorb other types of contaminants such as heavy metals, dioxins, PCBs, and so forth. And so once those particles are ingested, we may also have these toxic substances released into the organisms, which can cause problems. So there's pretty good reasons to suggest that we need to be concerned about microplastics in the environment, even though we don't have really good quantitative data to this point. The next slide, please. Now, in terms of the sustainability goals, none of the 17 sustainability goals put forth by the United Nations directly address microplastics. This is a slide that came from plasticsoup.com, and they relate how microplastic and microplastic problems relate to 6 of these different sustainability goals that you see here. There's certainly no question that the global community recognizes plastics and microplastics is perhaps one of the most significant emerging pollutants on a global scale. And it's something that we need to take immediate measures in terms of reducing plastic production and the release of plastics into the environment. We also need to be able to understand the potential impacts of plastics on biota and potentially human health. Okay, next slide. So with that in mind, we're going to focus in for the remainder of the talk on river systems. As I mentioned, in comparison to marine environments, there hasn't been a lot done on rivers in terms of plastic contamination. But one of the things that we noticed early on is that as a particle, microplastics can be treated in some ways as another type of particulate contaminant. And we should be able to use the same type of approaches that we've used for other particulates to address microplastics. These types of kind of geomorphic hydrologic studies are usually done at 2 different scales. One is at an individual site, where we're generally looking at the concentrations of the contaminant within the water and its partitioning into sediments, and then the load, how much of that material is moving downstream as a function of time, so under different flow conditions and temporal variations that occur at that particular site. The other scale is the distribution of the contaminants along the entire river system. And in this case, we're often looking at where those contaminants get stored, where are the hot spots, and why do those hot spots exist. We want to know how long they will remain in those alluvial or riverine sediments. And then in many cases, we can look at the spatial distribution of contaminants along the river and try to get an understanding of what the sources of the contaminants are. And so we're going to take a look at that to some degree. But before we do, I want to look at some of the differences that exist between the transport of plastics and the transport of rock and mineral fragments in rivers. Next slide. Now, perhaps one of the biggest differences between trying to assess plastic transport and rock and fragment transport is its density. Plastics have a density ranging from about 0.85 to grams per cubic centimeter to maybe 1.35 grams per cubic centimeter, as opposed to mineral matter, which is on the order of 2.65 grams per cubic centimeter or much higher. In addition, some of the plastics that you see towards the top of the slide here will float in water, and other plastics are dense enough that they will actually sink. Those that float, we would expect would be transported primarily by dispersive processes and would be deposited near the high water line. They might be trapped by vegetation along the channel margins, or during floods would be carried onto the floodplain and deposited there. The heavier particles would have a higher tendency to be incorporated into the channel bed sediments near the channel bed. Okay. Next slide.
Professor Miller, 5 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll have to hurry through this, but what we do, one of the things that's actually controlling microplastic transport downstream is called the active layer, in a channel bed. What this active layer is referring to is during a flood, these channel bed sediments get eroded and the contaminants are released into the water column. And then as water levels decrease, they get redeposited in the channel bed. And so this kind of a mechanism is really controlling the distribution and the transport of contaminants along most rivers. We believe this is also true for plastics, and there's some evidence to suggest that. And in fact, some of the work that's been done, Hurley and others in the UK, have found that during a flood, we may have a reduction in microplastic concentrations by as much as 60 to 80% or more. So we're getting a lot of deposition and reworking of the plastics, probably much more so than we do other types of contaminants in rivers. Next slide. Just very briefly, I'll mention that one of the big differences between plastics and minerals is that plastics are also affected by biofilms. So these are biological or bacterial films that grow over the plastics. They can occur very rapidly. They've been identified in both marine and freshwater environments. They affect the density of the particles. So a plastic particle that may float originally may become dense enough to sink. And perhaps more importantly, that biofilm is sticky, so it allows it to form aggregates. It can actually bind with mineral matter into larger particles, which are more dense, and that affects its accumulation in the channel bed sediments. Next slide. So some of the things that I think are transferable between previous studies related to things like heavy metals and microplastics is the realization that metals that are associated with sediments are not uniformly distributed within the channel bed. So for example, we might have a lot of fine-grained materials in this pool. Those fine-grained sediments are chemically reactive and may hold a lot of trace metals and other kinds of contaminants. These coarser-grained areas with higher flow, less fine-grained materials, lower concentration. So the point being is that concentrations are going to vary pretty dramatically from one site to another, even within a short reach. We believe that these types of relationships are even going to be more dramatic when we start looking at this in terms of microplastics because of the wide range of sizes, shapes, and densities that we actually have. And it's not only limited to the channel bed, but it's also limited here to floodplain deposits like that you see in the lower right-hand slide. Next slide. Okay, I think I'll skip through this and go right to the last slide there, the conclusions. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yep, there we go. In the interest of time here, I'll just kind of summarize by saying that we currently know very little about the transport, transformations, and deposition of microplastics in rivers. It's truly a developing, brand new field that deserves a lot of attention given its potential impacts on a wide range of biota. If you're a young investigator or a mid-level investigator, there is enormous potential to be at the cutting edge of a new field here. And the good news is that you can do some of these studies without a lot of sophisticated equipment. With the one exception, if you're trying to look at the composition of the plastics, then you do have to have a fairly sophisticated lab, often like FTIR, spectroscopy, and so forth. But this is something a lot of people can get involved with. We need a lot of data. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for a master's thesis, a PhD, or a new area of study, this is something to look at. The last thing I'll mention again is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have a tremendous amount of information already developed in terms of the transport of other types of contaminated sediments. We can take these approaches, these methods, and apply them to microplastics. And this should be able to reduce our time, effort, and costs of making big advances in the study of plastics in riverine settings. With that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Miller. I think it's insightful presentation and efficient presentation. Let me convey the keyword what presented by Professor Miller. There are a lot of variety of plastic. He focused study on microplastic, and the microplastic crystal to the environment has implication to the environment, biological and health environment, and also related to SDGs, at least 5 SDGs related to microplastic. Pillar number 6, 11, 12, 14, and 15. Microplastic concentrated in river sediment, and one way to deal with this is by geomorphic approach. Professor Miller, in the meantime, there are 2 questions through chatting. You're welcome to respond while we are listening to other presenter. Okay, let me continue with the second presenter, Professor Peter Gell from Federation University, Australia. This is the CV of Professor Peter Gell from Federation University, Australia. He is Professor of Environmental Science, the education working experience. You take a look. The research focuses on applied bioecology, wetland restoration, and freshwater bio monitoring. He will present his idea on wetland management, preparing for climate and coastal change using adaptation pathways. Professor Gell, time is yours. 20 minutes for you.
Ah, yes. Sorry, I was muted. Is that... So I was saying terima kasih to Professor Hadi for the invitation and Professor Hadianto, and also to Undip for my ongoing role as adjunct professor, which I welcome greatly and have attended ICENIS before and met many people at Undip. Unfortunately, I can't be there obviously this year, but I do get a feel for the collaboration and camaraderie that I experienced at the last meetings. So my research interest is in long-term wetland change, and with a view to understanding that, to assist in understanding pathways of change, both past through to the present and from the present into the future. And that's what I will try to do during this presentation. So next slide, please. Is there another slide? Okay, so the next slide covers the thank you. Safe operating spaces. The Stockholm Resilience Centre came up with the notion of understanding planetary boundaries in terms of sustainable development for the planet. And it identified 3 of the 9 planetary boundaries that humanity had already exceeded. There may be disastrous consequences for sustainable. 3 of the 9 development goals, of course, humanity is critical in terms of, and these have been applied. Note that the 3 that we have exceeded, according to this paper in Nature with Rockstrom and Stefan and others, is that we have well exceeded the threshold for biodiversity loss globally, well exceeded that for nitrogen, in that we are applying bioavailable nitrogen into our waterways, and we are approaching limits with respect to climate change. And these 3 areas are key. Next slide, please. So few people realise the high proportion of value that fresh water contributes to global biodiversity. We think very much of terrestrial biodiversity, tropical rainforests, for example, but lake river.
Enggak, kita enggak. Dari dia.
Reservoirs are only 2.3. Next slide, please. Critically, also, we tend to focus on biodiversity loss in other systems. We're very familiar with, but the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet Index shows that, in fact, freshwater ecosystem biodiversity has declined by much more than either of the marine or terrestrial ecosystems. So marine ecosystems, in fact, freshwater ecosystems, as much as 83%. So we are well within our rights to focus on freshwater biodiversity, and the rest of the decline in that to contribute to. Next, please. So Dudgeon and others over 10 or 15 years ago identified the major threats to our freshwater ecosystems. Overexploitation of water, large volumes of water are used for irrigation and domestic purposes. Water pollution of all sorts, and we've just heard about from Jerry, one of the forms of water pollution. Flow modification through weirs and structures, diversions, habitat degradation, and exotic species. And we can see evidence of that not too far from Samarang. Next slide, please. More recently, I was involved in a paper with Reed and others that have identified these, and we identified 12 emerging freshwater salinisation, which will be a consequence of rising sea levels, of emerging threats that we identified in this paper in Biological Review. Biological reviews, and Jerry's just given an excellent outline of. Slide, please. So my area of research focus is in the Murray-Darling Basin. And while I know Indonesia has many islands and so has many small catchments, Australia is famous for one particularly large catchment, that being the Murray-Darling Basin, and its area is over 1 million square kilometres. And on account of its size, it ranges in climate from subtropical climates in the north, which receive most of their rainfall in the southern summer, in the second, and the main source of freshwater supply to the Murray River system at least. And then to the west is the arid to semi-arid zones of the deserts of South Australia and New South Wales. So quite contrasting climates spatially across the system. So water that falls in the tropics ends up reaching the ocean down past Adelaide in the temperate zone. Next slide, please. My main research tool is in sediment-based reconstruction of wetland condition. And my principal source of indicator are microscopic diatom algae. And as they are made of silica, they're preserved in sediments. And we can see where they're living today and understand their aquatic preferences. And so we can infer from the diatoms that preserve in continuous sediment sequences changes to wetlands. So this site here in Mildura in the Lower Murray system is a wetland next to the main river, and is a 1 metre core which covers about 150 years of history. And before river regulation, we could see that it was dominated by species that live on plants in clear water with low pollution levels. And soon after the river regulation in 1920, there was a rapid shift across to turbid pollution indicators, as you can see over on the left-hand side of that diagram. So a substantial shift in the ecological character on account of infrastructure going into the river system. Next slide, please. And over a long period of time, myself and colleagues have records of wetlands down the Murray and Murrumbidgee systems in the southern Murray-Darling Basin. And we have embarked upon a range of meta-analyses of changes that we see in wetlands over 100 to even over 5,000 years in the wetlands that have got long continuous records of change. And of the 50 European arrival over 150 years ago. So there remains no pristine wetlands in the Murray-Darling Basin. And of the 50, let's say, since European arrival, Murray-Darling Basin on the basis of this analysis. Most of them have been impacted by sediments and turbidity, also to a large extent nutrients in almost half of the wetlands we've studied, and a third of them have suffered from increased salt input. This being a very low, salts have impacted on these negatively. What you're looking at there is one of the major rivers in the Murray-Darling Basin, the Lachlan River, and you can see how turbid that main river stem is. And we see similar patterns in wetlands all the way down the river system, in wetlands many hundred river kilometres apart. Next slide, please. And we know that this is likely to be impacting upon higher biota. The loss of aquatic plants inferred from the diatoms seems to have removed the habitat for specialist small-bodied fish species which have become vulnerable, if not critically endangered. They require complex vegetation as habitat, protection from predation, and for reproduction. The critically endangered Murray hardyhead requires submerged aquatic plant beds to breed, as does the critically endangered purple spotted gudgeon, which requires dense aquatic vegetation to shelter. So we would suggest that it's this basin-wide transition to turbid water that has caused the loss of macrophytes, which is a major contributor to the collapse in the populations of a diverse community of small-bodied fish in the Murray-Darling Basin. Next slide, please. And we can match this up not from just the sediment record, but also the historical record. Early explorers in the 1850s actually collected large numbers of small-bodied fish from wetlands, and these are now today extinct from those sites, presumably lost due to habitat degradation. Next slide, please. So what is the mechanism for change? On the left-hand side, it may well just be the continuous connection of the wetland on the floodplain with the main river, and the river being a supplier of sediments, nutrients, and the phytoplankton that we record in the sediment record. Sometimes when the connection closes, the wetlands may dry up and they can reset and the plants may recover. Alternatively, on the right-hand side, this might be a critical transition. We might have a dosing of sediments and nutrients into the system, which has killed many of the macrophytes, released sediments and nutrients due to the loss of cover, which is advantaging the phytoplankton. In those situations, the phytoplankton themselves can retain conditions that suit themselves, an impact on the photic depth that denies macrophytes the prospects of recovering. And so entrenching the system in a phytoplankton state when it once was an aquatic plant macrophyte dominated state. Next slide, please. So we've analysed those 60 sites and looked at spatially how that might vary across space. Shallow wetlands in the top of the systems seem to resist that change because as enough light gets down to the plants for them to persist. Down the bottom of the system, wetting and then drying and then wetting again allows plants to recover and reset. And so we have this sporadic shift from phytoplankton back to plants. But the deep wetlands in the top of the system, top panel B, have permanently switched to less productive phytoplankton sites where they once were dominated by aquatic plants and rich in small-bodied fish. Next slide, please. So we need to understand the use of the Murray-Darling Basin in terms of its water use. And there's a few panels to come, so if we can just advance this animations. Irrigation began in the 1880s, next. And as we can see, as happened in much of the world, the top panel shows the diversion of water for irrigation use. If we can advance the animation, next. So this period in the middle of the last century, there was a ramping up of water use in the Murray-Darling Basin, but it happened to be in the bottom panel that shows rainfall effectively during a flood-dominated regime. We ramped up irrigation when there was a lot of water available. Next. We now find ourselves in a drought-dominated regime and we are massively overcommitted in terms of water allocation for irrigation. Next. If we look to the past, we find the last drought-dominated regime lasted 50 years. And so we need to prepare ourselves for perhaps another 10 or even 20 or even 40 years of low flows and acute water resource allocation decisions. Next. So in down the bottom of the system, we have lakes that were considered fresh, and with changing climate became saline over 100 years ago. So the barrage you can see there was put in place in 1940 to resist the penetration of seawater into a freshwater lake, Lake Alexandrina. That's now identified as mostly fresh, but on account of that permanent inundation, it has accumulated acid sulfate soils, which were exposed in the recent drought, creating a massive acidification threat. These lakes now demand over 2,000 gigalitres of water a year to keep water over the acid sulfate soils to avoid acidification and to provide irrigation water for the region and water supply for the city of Adelaide. Next. So under the acute stress of water allocation in the system, Australia embarked upon a massive management plan for the Murray-Darling Basin to redeem over 3,000 gigalitres of water for environmental purposes at a likely cost of 13 billion Australian dollars, anywhere between 5 and 28 billion, depending on how you go about redeeming the water. And there were immediate detrimental impacts on irrigation communities. The focus here, because of a short-term view I'd assert, was on water volume as a means of restoring ecosystems, whereas the paleoecological research that I just showed you showed that water quality was also a critical issue. It may continue to be a critical issue and actually risk not accruing benefit from the allocation of $13 billion worth of water under the plan. Next.
Professor, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thanks very much. So this great social cost came because of poor assessment of the impact of redeeming that water on regional communities. And the stress that put on those communities saw them burn the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, as you can see on the left, and has pitted communities against each other in terms of the stress this has brought on regional ecological development, or economic development, I should say. Next. So the plan was a solution, but it effectively traded economic development against environmental conservation. So there was another solution we would suggest that would better trade off over time a sustainable solution to recovering environmental condition while permitting the persistence of social and economic development. So the perceived solution was a cap in trade for water, expensive government buybacks, great impact on society, and failure to account for social costs of rural decline. I and others have asserted that an adaptation pathways approach would be better, which would be to identify critical measures to implement now, but to look at over decades solutions that could come at points in time into the future. Next slide, please. And again, that's just to illustrate the strength of opinion in the basin about wetland restoration as opposed to irrigation development. Next slide. So in terms of the future, we also need to look at the impact of future climates. And here we have in the orange box the prospects under 50% decline of rainfall, an increase in 2 degrees of temperature, almost a 50% decline in runoff or water yield across this system, which ramps up the challenge of water allocation between the environment and irrigation use. Next slide, please. And quickly again, and of course we need to face the challenge of rising seas, as they did in 2014 in Cornwall with this storm surge. Next slide, please. And we're well aware of what the sea level modelling suggests, and Stefan Rahmsdorf's work has suggested that the IPCC is probably a little conservative. We may expect by the end of the century in the order of 50 to even $1.50 meters of sea level rise, which obviously is going to have a substantial impact. But these are known and we need to plan for these rises into the future. Next slide, please. There is a lot known about resilience and how you go about adapting. One of the things to do, if you in the Murray-Darling Basin have been embarking upon a conservation pattern, which is continuing to use water and shifting out redundancies and reducing our adaptive capacity. The best measure is to implement short adaptive cycles to ensure that the system is adapted to the changing condition. The risk of not doing that is a major transformation and reorganisation, as the alpha path shows. Next slide, please. So an adaptation pathways approach, the present Murray-Darling Basin levels all the cost of adaptation on the present generation, and they're resisting that greatly. An adaptation pathways approach identifies future scenarios and devises a schedule of investment, prioritising actions and then spreading the cost of adaptation through time. Next slide. In the lower lakes, for example, the barrages may need to be extended, but not yet, sometime in the future, or we may decide that we will accommodate rising sea level and allow those freshwater lakes to become estuarine once again. And that would be on account of the fact that we can't afford the 2,000 gigalitres just to make an end-of-system lake fresh when in fact it was once an estuary. So that's a sort of an adaptation pathways approach for the end of system. For the whole of system, next slide please, we could look at a range of measures. In the short term, we can look at fish management to protect those small-bodied fish by reinstating aquatic plants, have water efficiency measures, domestic water capture to offset the shift from water from consumptive use to environmental use, sediment and nutrient mitigation, prioritising e-flows, but ultimately we might have to open the barrages, as I've suggested, and in the end we might have to stop irrigation farming and convert to dryland farming. So here we have a path from 2000 to 2070, which looks at the loss of water through climate and a shifting allocation of water as we go into the future, in a pathway and not all at once. Next slide, please. Of course, rising sea levels will be critical globally, and this paper identifies a staged management retreat, which is similar to an adaptation pathway. It anticipates the removal and abandonment of hard protection structures at the coast, decisions to stop maintaining such structures, restricting on coastal land use, identifying new places for communities to go, and the removal of or relocation of at-risk infrastructure. And of course, Indonesia, through the removal of the capital, is embarking upon this process already. Next slide, please. And having been to Semarang and looked at the freshwater systems and the coastal systems, there could well be an adaptation approach to dealing with the pollution, the invasion of aquatic plants, to mitigate pollution levels coming down the Semarang River. But at the bottom end also, there needs to be some sort of adaptation pathway such as that staged retreat on account of rising sea levels and land subsidence. So this sort of approach would fit very neatly into the issues that Semarang is needing to deal with over future decades with respect to both water supply, climate change and rising sea levels. Next slide, please. So to finish, adaptation pathways are now being widely recognised as a just approach to a sustainable future. Freshwater wetlands and the biodiversity within them are endangered. They've been subjected to persistent threats and emerging risks. These will include hydroclimatic change and sea level rise, and we need to recognise these and accept these as future scenarios, and rather than implementing rather abrupt and unjust measures, we need to plan out a future that provides a sustainable future, a secure future, and shares the cost, not just directing it at the present generation, but sharing it across this and future generations. Next, please. Again, terima kasih for the opportunity.
Terima kasih, Prof. Jel, for the insight presentation. I like the term, you can eat wetland. The keyword given by Professor Jel is, as we take a look at his abstract, freshwater ecosystem are among the most threatened in the world. The threat comes from climate change and rising sea level. Adaptation pathways approach is the key to manage the system that require human needs, require to accommodate human needs and society obligation to global biodiversity. The studies come from Australia, and I think you are all familiar with the case taken in Semarang. I think it's Banjir Canal and also Rawapening. Thank you, Professor Jel. All participants, I would like to remind you, you could raise questions through chatting while we are listening to other presenter. Now let us continue with three speakers, Dr. Yurdi Yasmi from International Rice Research Institute, IRRE. This is the CV, short CV, Dr. Yusti. Education, he is from IB, Wageningen, Master in Wageningen and PhD also in Wageningen. Working experience and also is focused on rice, agri-food system, climate change, sustainable agriculture, forest, and landscape management. Environmental agreement is very interesting interest of research. Dr. Yurdi will present a topic on rice, agri-food system in Southeast Asia and its contribution to SDGs, specifically on zero hunger. Dr. Yurdi, please, 5 minutes for 20 minutes for you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarto Hadi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. First of all, let me congratulate University of Diponegoro for bringing in this important seminar. Where I think some 200 participants are participating. I would like to personally also thank Professor Hadianto for inviting me to be one of the keynote speakers. I've truly enjoyed the previous presenters, and I really think what they have presented will be complementary to what I'm going to present. So my presentation will focus on rice agri-food systems and its contribution to SDG 2 in Southeast Asia. As we all know, SDG 2s relate to achieving zero hungers by 2030. And next, please. In this short presentation, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, in this presentation, I will discuss three things. First, why does rice matter? Yeah, perhaps most of you already know the answers. Yeah. Second, how to achieve SDG 2 and the role of rice agri-food systems in SDG 2. And thirdly, what are the current IRIS research in this area? Next, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So why does rice matters? Well, rice has fed the world for millennia, and demand will continue to increase in the foreseeable future. As we speak now, over 4 billion people consume rice on a daily basis. And in Southeast Asia, over 500 million people consume rice. In our region, in Southeast Asia, to eat means to eat rice. Yeah, rice provides more than 50% of the caloric supply for people in Asia. However, rice sector faces increasingly new challenges And some of those challenges are climate change, various issues related to demographic change, like urbanization, the increase of population, the increased demands, for new and etc. Important because, can I have the next slide, please? Professor Sudarto, can you hear me or no?
Yes, clear. Yes.
Okay, I think whoever operates the slide maybe doesn't hear me very well. Okay, thank you very much. So rice is also important because it has so many cultural values to communities. In many communities throughout Southeast Asia, like in Indonesia, rice symbolizes many activities. People will have celebration for the rice harvest. People will also do certain things at certain periods during rice cultivation. And this is a photo that reflects a rice culture in Sumatra that I took about 2 years ago. Next, please. Okay. Because of the importance of rice in Southeast Asia, many national emblems of countries in the region has rice in it. If you look at, countries like Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, and Vietnam, in their national emblems, they have rice. So in Southeast Asia, we often say rice is life. Without rice, there is no life in Southeast Asia. And even the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, have their symbol also reflected in terms of rice. The green objects in the middle of the symbols is actually rice. So food security is not possible without, addressing issues related to rice. In Southeast Asia, food security means the ability to provide enough rice to its population, but also to provide nutritious rice to the population of Southeast Asia. Next, please. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So the role of rice in agri-food system in development 2, or in achieving zero hunger. Achieving zero hunger without rice is impossible because rice is staple food for the majority of people in Southeast Asia. More than 90% of the population in Southeast Asia eat rice. In some countries, they eat 3 times rice per day, like in Indonesia. In other countries, they eat at least twice rice per day in Indonesia. Therefore, if we are talking about tackling hunger in the region, we have to really prioritize the rice sectors. Second, the rice sectors faces tremendous challenges too, as I already mentioned earlier. So in order to fight zero hungers, we have to address all these challenges. One of the main challenges are the lacks of water. I think the previous presenters already mentioned about the importance of the wetland. Rice sectors actually consumes a lot of waters in the production. Secondly, rice is also facing a lot of issues related to climate change. The changing weather patterns, the droughts, the floods are all impacting on rice productions and rice agri-food systems in general. So this is just a picture how rice is situated in a landscape in Vietnam. So if you see there in the rice landscape, you have forests, you have water systems, but at the same time, it's intertwined with communities or housings or other infrastructures like agricultures, road, etc. This means that rice will have to take into account all these interlinkages with other sectors as well. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. So the second part of my talk would be achieving SDG 2 and the role of rice agri-food system. Next, please. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. SDG 2 challenges in Southeast Asia. So in order to achieve SDG 2, we have to tackle, those challenges below. And these are just some of the key challenges of SDG 2 in our region. The first one, 6 people in Southeast Asia. This is like 9% of the population in the region. Secondly, 33 million people are severely food insecure. What does it mean, severely food insecure? They don't have enough to eat, and sometimes they have to go a few days without food. So this is a very important segment of our society in order to achieve SDG 2. 33 million of them are still food insecure. Stunting in children under 5 years old is actually quite high, 25% of the children under 5 in the region. At the same time, we also have what we call the other side of the problem. The overweight in children is actually quite high or increasing over the year. At the moment, just under 8% of the children in Southeast Asia are overweight. So this is also a challenge of, of the region. Not only people that have not enough food, but also people that have, food that are not nutritious and that they have more or beyond their body mass weight. Next, please. Okay, thank you. So at the beginning of the work in the marks, we were talking about COVID-19. COVID-19 challenge because COVID-19 actually has triggered economic recessions, including in Indonesia and in other countries, where we are having impacts agriculture's activities. Example, in Thailand, where agriculture activities are done by quite many migrant workers in Cambodia, those restrictions have made it difficult for them to do their agriculture activity in Thailand. Likewise, in countries like in Indonesia. COVID-19 also posed difficulties in getting agriculture input, like seed, fertilizers, and equipment, because there are so many checkpoints between cities and rural areas, so the delivery of these agriculture inputs becomes slower, or sometimes also they do not reach the rural areas. COVID-19 also posed difficulties in bringing products to the market or consumers. Again, this is mainly due to the lockdown, or in Indonesia, what we call SBB, where the products from the farmers actually getting to the market quite late, and those products have been destroyed, or at the time it reached the consumer, they are no longer eatable. So these are just some of the challenge brought by COVID-19 to the rice agri-food system. Next, please. So what are the impacts of COVID-19 in Southeast Asia? I don't know who operates the slides, but he doesn't probably hear me. Okay. Okay, so what are the impacts of COVID-19 in Southeast Asia? What we know so far, the economy is hit hardest in all countries. Yeah? COVID-19 is an economy-wide global crisis. Restrictions on movement, like lockdown, closing of businesses, disruptions of supply chain, has caused many problems. Tourism and hospitality industries are brought to a stall. If you see in our regions, many economies actually rely on tourism, like Thailand, Indonesia, and also Vietnam. These are the three tourism hotspots in the region. These countries are affected by COVID-19. Job losses, including in the informal sectors, are quite high. An analysis by Asian Development Bank suggested that 70 to 76% of the total employment coming from informal sectors are actually impacted by COVID-19. COVID-19 also reduced remittances by 20%. Remittances are those money being sent back by the workers to their home countries. And in these regions, we have so many workers that are working outside their own countries. Like they are working in the Middle East, in the US, in Australia, or in other countries like in Europe. So their ability to send money back home to their family have reduced about 8%. This is huge. Eh? Next slide, please. Look at this graph. Next slide, please. Okay. If we look at this graph, this is the unemployment rate in ASEAN countries. We can see that in some countries, the unemployment rate is still relatively high. If you look at for example, the Myanmar, the Indonesia, still 5.3% unemployment rate. In Vietnam is relatively low, but if you look at the Philippines, is 5.4%. In other countries, they are still relatively high. COVID-19 actually risks many more unemployment in all these countries. So we will see probably more people going jobless in the coming months or years. Also, at the same time, there are still people who are just, on top of the poverty line. They are risking going back to poverty. So these people who just escape poverty, their numbers are quite significant, but they probably will jump back to poverty. So these are some of the issues that we are facing in ASEAN countries. These all have implication to zero hunger and also to the rice production sectors in ASEAN. Next, please. So in our study, there are three important aspects of safeguarding our food system. The first one is related to food availability. So food availability is very important. It means that there is sufficient food for everybody. This also means that production of this food will have to continue despite COVID situation, including, to ensure the production, they have to have access to inputs like fertilizers and seed. The second aspect of safeguarding our food system is food accessibility. It means that where the food is available, it has to be accessible. Otherwise, there is a problem here. For example, if transportation of the foods to the consumer is being disrupted, then we will have a problem. So reliable logistical infrastructure to reach the consumers and markets are very important with regard to food accessibility. The third element in safeguarding our food system is food affordability. This relates to the price. can people afford to buy it? If not, then something will have to be fixed. Yeah. So in this case, the price of the food matters. And as we all know, the price of food will depend on the production level, but also depends on the demands from the consumers. Next, please. So what has been the International Rice Research Institute responses to COVID-19 to ensure food security and also zero hunger in Southeast Asia? I will just mention a few of them. First, we have released policy papers based on our research and analysis surrounding the ongoing COVID-19 crisis and how can we actually build resilience of the rice agri-food systems, and also how can we build resilience of the people who depends on the rice-based agri-food system. Secondly, IRIS at the moment is conducting country assessments throughout the region and globally on the impacts of COVID-19 on the rice agri-food systems. The results of this will hopefully be available to the public through our website. Thirdly, IRI is working with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, like through SOMAMAF, ASEAN Rice Net, ASEAN +3 Emergency Rice Reserve. We are actually supporting all these ASEAN objectives by ensuring that rice production is stable during the COVID situation. And also we are working with various countries throughout the region and globally, and partners to ensure that our food system are safeguarded and disruptions are minimized. So I think this is my very short presentation, Professor Sudarto, just to to stimulate discussion. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yurdi Yasmi. I think some keywords that we need to consider for discussion. Dr. Yusti mentioned rice is life, not only important to feed us, but also related to cultural. And rice is an instrument to achieve SDGs 2, zero hunger. And rice is interlinked with other sector. But to achieve SDGs 2, we have encounter challenges. One related to insecure on food faced by countries in South Asia. Second is COVID-19 that worsen SDGs 2. There are key words to safeguarding of our system. Food availability, food accessibility, and food affordability. For participants, welcome to raise the question to all speakers, and we view there is already interaction between speaker and the participant through chatting. Now we move on for speaker, Dr. Liu Kian Heng. Dr. Liu Kian Heng from Liu Strategies, Singapore. You can view his short CV, education, working experience, and research focus. And he would like to share us topic on every drop of waterproof counts for humanity. Dr. Liu Kian Heng, 20 minutes for you. Please, time is yours.
Terima kasih, Profesor Suharto. Selamat pagi, Pak Hadi Yanto, and to all our foreign friends who are in Semarang by cyberspace. Welcome to Asia. My topic today is actually quite simple. In fact, I'm going back to very basic issues. And that issue is about simply water. And the water we are talking about is on how we can improve ourselves with the use of water and how we can save water. I'm very glad that Professor Gel has raised the issues of water and waterways. And also, Professor Yodi, I'm very glad you say rice is life, but rice needs water to grow, and rice needs water to be cooked. So if rice is life, water is more than double life. So my topic is called Every Drop of Water Footprint Counts for Humanity. Can you see my slide, Professor Suharto?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, I'll bring it to you now. Is it on the screen?
Not yet, please. Not yet.
Okay.
So, Dr. Liu, you operate by yourself?
No, I'm operating here with my staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to worry. I mean, the screen,
Okay.
I can see it on my screen.
I haven't seen yet.
Okay.
Okay, now.
Now,
Yes.
thank you very much. All right. So as I was saying, that my topic is on water, and we are talking about back to basic issues of every drop of water, just like every grain of rice is very important, and the water footprint counts for humanity. And humanity means the whole world. We are talking about the whole world, and to understand the whole world, we must understand how water is being used over the years throughout the whole world. First, we must go back 200 years ago about this very interesting poem called Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And it states that water, water everywhere. And all the boats did drink. Water, water everywhere, not any drop to drink. So this is very interesting, 200 years ago, and it's still holding true today, that 2.1 billion globally still do not have access to clean, safe drinking water. 200 years after that point, 3.4 million people are dying every year because of scarcity or contaminated water that they're drinking. And only only 1% of the water is fresh water on Mother Earth, and is available for abstraction or direct human consumption. In short, under our SDG goals, we can see that we must ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. This is a very dire strait. Since 40s to even till today, water is still very, very critical. So why is that so? Because we want to understand that education has to play a part in terms of water use and also in water control and water conservation. It also involves the economy too. As you can see, the education level has been going up since early 1800s to till today, which has been growing in 1940s by about 2 to 3 times faster. As the education improves, the economy goes in tandem, also improves. As you can see here, 1940 to year 2016, the economy speed up by education has grown by 3 to 5 times overall, and about 3 times for the whole world. Different rates for different countries. The economy is also propelled by the population, which has also grown quite exponentially over the years in 1940 to now 2020, with a population of about 7.7 billion today. Now, the increase in population, of course, will cause water use to grow. And you can see in 1940 to year 2014, the amount of water that has been consumed has grown by almost 3 times. In short, understanding education, economy, and population on relating to water, we can see from here, by the analysis of different years from 1940 to 2014, education of the world population has improved. Likewise, the economy has improved. The population has also grown by so much, from 2.3 to 7.3. And the water use in terms of trillion meter cube per year has also grown from 1.1 to 3.9, almost 4 trillion meter cube of water per year. We did an analysis and we calculated, and it shows that the amount per capita of water use per person per year in meter cube is 480 to 546.6 trillion meter cube. In terms of change over the years, you can see that the water has increased use rapidly, and over the years around 1980, the water increase has reduced, as you can see by the negative sign here, the change. And let me present this in the form of graph, that you can see that the change since 1940, there was increase and continue increasing use of water per capita, and coming to 1980, the amount of per capita increase has reduced, meaning it has gone negative. Since then, and until today, in 2014, and perhaps even to today, we are hoping that this reduction could continue. In other words, we should not be increasing, we should be going to 0 per capita. This graph gives you an idea that after 1980, there was some consciousness in terms of water, the criticality of ensuring water is conserved and preserved and not to waste water. So if you plot this against the per capita of water over the years, you can see that the highest is in 688.3 in 1980. After that, per person is consuming less, but the less could be much, much more, going to 0 growth if possible. And this is what my paper is about, is to how to help our youngsters to understand that we should not and cannot continue to consume water the way that we are doing. And if you look at the average over the 74 years, we are talking about 577 meter cube per year per person of water. Of course, all this water is not just only for your drinking or washing or for your ablution, but it's also used for other things like agriculture, industry, and so on and so forth. So with that, I just want to share with you how this water is being used in the form of your water footprint. And everyone has a responsibility to control your own water footprint. So what is water footprint? It is defined, in fact, long ago, is broadly for measuring the country's fresh water used for the population's consumption and or resulted in contamination. And this was given by A.Y. Hoskra and P.Q. Hung. Another term which is very interesting is called virtual water. It is not the water that we drink or consume directly, but it's the water which is embodied or embedded in a product. Not in real sense, but in virtual sense. It refers to the water needed for produce anything, any production, or which is locked into your product. So it could be your agricultural product, it could be your handphone. There is also water being used. This water footprint sustainability was coined by John Anthony Allen, who invented this concept of virtual water in 1993. And he came up with this very key word Professor Suharto would like to hear is called liquid capital. It is water is liquid and it's capital. And capital for Mother Earth and for the whole population of the Earth. Every individual must listen. And listen is very important because it is only through listen, through, in Bahasa Indonesia, it's called dengar dan belajar. If you listen, you don't learn, it's useless. If you listen by hearing from one ear to another ear, then it's also useless. We must listen to learn how to shrink one's water footprint and embrace the concept to the brink, right to the brink, on now a drop to drink till every drop counts. Just like rice, every drop of rice must be eaten, not wasted. So how do we wish to know the ways in which we can help to do and conserve water? To do that, we must understand wastages. How much water has been wasted? In World Water Day, they ask you to find out for yourself. Are you a waster? You can go to the website, later I'll give it to you, to go and ask yourself and see for yourself how much and why you are wasting water. What are the ways? Sustainable way is to educate and understand how fresh water should not be wasted, so as to reinforce the sustainability of our water footprint. Every individual, every entity, whether you are a company, you are a school, you are an institution, you are a government, you are a town, you are a province or a nation, shall make not a drop to drink till every drop counts, as their mantra, by recognizing that all the ways to water can be cared. Water, we must care for water. C-A-R-E. C-A-R-E is a four-letter word, and it's more important than C-U-R-E, cure. If you don't care, then you have to cure, which means you are already sick. So first, you must use water properly. In United Nations, it has stated that the right to water, everyone has a right to water. Water shall be not only equal for everyone to drink or consume, it is a equality as well as it is equity for everyone, so that we are secure and safe to have fresh drinking water. The efficient and adequate use should be 50 and 100 liters of water per person per day. That is what is mandated by United Nations. That is the requirement for any decent human being to survive on planet Earth. But there are too much misuse of water, where we use water for uncontrolled water lawns, landscaping, car washing, bathtub bathing, or even in the toilets and in the kitchen. We flush the toilet so much, and we also allow a lot of wastages due to leakages in our system. Coupled by abuse of water. Imagine, there are big guzzlers such as in USA, 1% of water wasted every year. This amount is 4.77 kilometer cube of water. And also on pollution, where water is being abused. The next thing is to understand how then this amount of water is wasted through countries which are affluent. Being more educated, more economically powerful, they tend to waste more water, as I use this term affluent versus affluent. The facts on leaks, you can see, this is obtained from EPA of USA, that every home, 10% have leaks in their home. And that is amount to 90 gallons or more per day. If you have 1 drop per second in your water faucet or your tap, you are wasting 3,000 gallons per year, which is about 12 meter cube, or about 1 month, 1 meter cube is wasted. And in US, the amount of water wasted is 1 trillion gallons. That is enough to supply for 11 million homes. If this amount of wasted water is used in Singapore, we can use it for 8 years for all our household. And therefore, we must help to reduce by repair or improve or control the water wastages through proper means. Now, we look at 3 countries which are very big countries, and 1 country which is called very small country called Singapore. These 4 countries combined together is close to 30% of the world's population. And you can see from their literacy rate of each country and their per capita GDP, you will see that the biggest guzzler of water per capita in terms of meter cube per year per person is 1,600 for USA. In China is 415. In Indonesia is 372. And in Singapore, which is considered high capita GDP, is 16 meter cube per year, which is a value I used and obtained from household in 2000. Now, the 60 meter cube is because Singapore does not have agricultural or other forms of industry which consume a lot of water. And if you were to use the United Nations reference of about 75% to 90% of the region available water is used, we can back calculate and find out these 3 countries actually, which are mainly agriculturally endowed country, will have household demand, which is the other 10 to 25%, as 160, 415, 41.5, and Indonesia 37.2 meter cube per year. So in fact, we should be learning from Indonesia. Indonesia is doing the correct thing now. Preserve what you have. If you consume 37 and definitely less than 60 of Singapore, then you are the model for whole world to follow actually. So congratulations to Indonesia. Please continue and preserve. Don't overconsume. The next thing is we must share with all the young people, using Indonesia as a good model to show that we must listen. Dengar sampai kita belajar. Betul-betul belajar. How? Because we always listen with the ear, but never listen with like the ancient Chinese say, ting. Ting is the Chinese word for listen. Using the ear, 10, there's a 10 here, the ear is here, the 10 is here, the eye, use the eye, 1, this is 1, and heart, as in making of an emperor, or the emperor must listen to the people with the ears fully, 10, eyes with 1 heart, then you are a good emperor, then you are a good king, or then you are a good listener. So we must really learn this way. So a student in real life learning on water footprint, sustainability, shall use all the faculties, the ears, the eyes, betul-betul listen to rationalize the sanctity and value of liquid capital. If not, they don't understand how precious it is. Water is life. Macam rice is also life. But water grows rice and also cook rice. If not, you cannot eat the rice. So water is double more important and more precious for life. There must be a 1 full heart. 10 亿心. 10 means 10, 1, it's 1. 心 means heart. Commitment to a king in eradicating wastefulness. What is it about? It is about using this word, powerful Chinese ancient word. Ear, eyes, heart, and king, with the 10, which is here, and 1. Okay, so we must learn it way. To do that, I get my students who are intern in my organization as mentees, and I make them learn this very important thing about every drop counts. And this is done in my living lab, and I like to quickly go through this in just 5 minutes, that the objectives of all the students who are polytechnic students and universities who come in as mentees, some are doing entrepreneurship, some are learning about water, some are learning about algae, that understanding water footprint at every individual level, everyone must learn. Everyone comes to my living lab, they must learn how to collect every drip and drop of water. And this is an experiment, and this experiment means they are involved, they are part of the experiment. This is a real life experiment, and the real life they will follow. In creating every drip and drop counts mindset, they must set a mindset, applying water footprint sustainability, and to realize that in Singapore, the National Water Agency aim is that by 2030, we must consume not more than 130 liters per person per day. Right now, we are consuming about 140. So what do? Every drip of water, every drop of water is collected in containers. There are 2 containers in the toilet and 1 container in the sink for drinking water. They can only use the water from the drip. We created the drip to show that even the drip overnight can accumulate to be enough water for them to use. So we have collected all those water. We measure the water every morning, and we measure it in the container, which is already marked and also calculated by calculating the size of the tank and container use. We also register it in the water meter. And then the amount of water every day collected is used for drinking, which is a 1.7 liters of hot water, and all the other uses such as for algae, for growing, aquarium, as well as putting in the algae bags, planting plants, and also for some aquatic plants. So the amount of water every day collected by the mentees in the living lab, in which they are now involved in collecting and using, are calculated. And this is shown that every drop counts, results are shown here. So in May to June, August till August, we collected this amount of water, and the drip rate we also calculated, and we found out it's about 0.65 drip milliliter per minute to as much as 13.3 milliliters per minute. The meter reading, you can see here, goes 0, 0, and 16, and 5. In fact, the meter, confidentially, do not let the water agency know. The water meter did not move, but we are already using so much water. because of the drip. And over 4 Sundays, these are days where they do not come to work, so they do not consume the water. So if you look at a graph, this is something that we have plotted for the month of July. So the blue one is actually the water collected from every drip. And the drip is in the form of milliliter per minute. It's also shown here in the orange color. And the gray one is the meter reading that we see. Only 4, 5, and then 0, 0, 0 most of the time. This thing is plotted, and if we calculate total number of days water collected is 107 days, including the Sundays. The water volume that we collected over the 107 days is 969.3 liters. And over the days, we have only 3 mentees, 2 from the Polytechnic and 1 from university. And the actual number of days they work is 92 days. If you calculate it out, it is every day, each person is consuming 3.512 liters. That is their water footprint. So they are now conscious that this is the amount of water. Sorry?
You have 3 minutes left.
Okay, sir.
Please.
I'm finishing soon. Yes. Therefore, the water footprint lessons tells us this. First, these are all the quotations that have been published in Singapore, in media, and also in YouTube. That, let me quote, we bet like 80% of Singaporeans waste water like this. You know, the way they waste water and also contribute to the water bill. In the big red, to build a strong water saving culture, Singapore needs to more than recycle messages. We keep on saying recycling the message, please stop water, please don't use water, please don't. But yet, we are still wasting water. So are you still wasting water? Saving water less is less concern for the younger people, the residents, as well as children, you know. So we must emphasize to the children. Environment and sustainability water conservation efforts often come out dry. The pressure of potable water for human equality, equity, as well as security is now even become more important due to incessant environmental disaster and some man-made grid-driven contamination catastrophe, which compound into health and related hygiene, infections, and livelihood matters. In some countries, water is an issue and becomes associated with atrocities, death. Water footprint of 3.5 liters per day per person is achievable if we do it by collecting water day by day. There are some other ways in which I hope to share, and one of which is called rainwater collection, which we can use directly into our WC. In every apartment in Singapore, high-rise, itu rain, hujan, water can be used straight without contaminating the pressured water. Water tap, that once you turn the water tap, the water rushes out and is always wasted before even you wash your hand. We must trap this water. And if every family can trap this water, I call it a tap water trap, rather than let the water run out into the floor trap. So, not a drop to drink till every drop counts. Very important. It's a message I hope everyone will take it from here. In conclusion, give me just 1 minute.
Okay.
In moving towards water footprint, sustainability, development goals for environment and human security, UN Water Family, the SDG 6, which we are going to achieve, is to ensure availability and sustainable management, water and sanitation for all, so that Singapore is also able to achieve 130 liters per day by 2030. Every individual and entity shall adopt, not a drop to drink till every drop counts, so that every drop of water footprint counts for humanity. Security, equality, share, and equity. Everybody, every human being has a right to the water. And with that, thank you very much. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum. I hope all of you.
Waalaikumsalam, Dr. Liu. Thank you very much.
And I hope all of you will be able to join me in Singapore. Come and visit us. If you're nearby, come more often. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for the offer. Dr. Liu, highlight that water is our life. We use the water, but also we need to save the water. there is a concept called water footprint. Is a freshwater consumption and or resulted in contamination. The water use increased parallel with the population growth, economic growth, and it is nice to hear from Dr. Liu that Indonesia is a good model for managing the water. We do hope so. So we need to conserve, we need to preserve the water. Less water footprint, meaning create less carbon footprint, and also less global warming. He also mentioned a good example of living laboratory that shared with us. Okay, now we move on to last speaker, Professor Iko van Berg. Are you with us already? Professor Airku van Berg.
Yes, I am.
Yes, good. Welcome to ICENIS, Professor Dr. Airku van Berg. He is Professor of Organizational Theory, School and Business and Economics from Frits University, Amsterdam. You can view the short thesis on education, working experiences, and also research focus is on organizational theory, social network theory, qualitative research, and entrepreneurship. He will share the topic on the topic entitled Faith and Development, the role of local religious organization and community change in Papua. Silakan, Pak Airku.
Terima kasih, Pak. Selamat pagi semua. Good morning.
Selamat pagi.
I will share my screen for my presentation. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, please.
Well, selamat pagi again. Good morning. I would like to share my research on local religious organizations in community development in Papua. I've been working for 6 years now in Papua in a local social venture foundation. And we were engaged in a couple of those processes, and I'll share a bit of my research on that topic. It's a bit of a weird presentation in view of the other presentations, I think, but it stresses the importance of local organizations, especially religious organizations in this context, in sustainable development. And especially in Indonesia, those organizations are really important for the social structure. So it's in this case, it's focused on a Christian organization, but it's applicable to all organizations. I'm actually supervising a PhD student in Surabaya. He's focusing on studying a couple of local organizations. So it's not only related to Christian, it's Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, any type of organization that can fulfill such a role in local sustainable development. Let me see how I do this. Okay. So, faith and development, is there a tension or is there rather collaboration? Faith-based organizations fulfill an important role in the social structure of Indonesian society, but for a long time, FBOs have been considered as something weird, especially in the international development agenda. Most big international organizations like the United Nations would like to work with secular or neutral, they call it, organizations rather than with religious organizations or faith-based organizations. Yet this has changed over the last decades as people start to acknowledge, also from the West, that these organizations are actually very important in many countries, and there's not such a thing as neutral organizations actually. All organizations have their own agenda, all organizations have their own background. Yet, so they started to collaborate more with those organizations, recognize the role of faith-based organizations in development, in local structures, but that relationship is not without tensions. As in particular, Western donors held contrasting secular worldviews, and this makes it difficult to collaborate with faith-based organizations. So what are the main advantages of faith-based organizations in sustainable development? This is based on a review of the literature, and there's quite a bit of literature, especially in the last 10 or 20 years, on faith-based organizations, and they come up in the end with 4 advantages. The first advantage is that most faith-based organizations have higher level of motivations of their employees or their volunteers. And this is based on the intrinsic motivation of those volunteers or those employees. They're intrinsically motivated to do something for society, for their fellow people in the city or the village. They're not only motivated by, let's say, monetary incentives or other goals. So they have a higher level of motivation compared to other organizations. The second advantage is that faith-based organizations can typically deliver aid at the right place, especially if government infrastructure is weak. This means that if you have, take for instance, an NGO coming to a village somewhere in Java, it's hard for that NGO to operate on the local neighborhood level, as they don't have the feet on the ground, so to say. But rather, if you have the local mosque, it will have its own network with all people who are actually from the village, from the neighborhood. So if they want to do something, let's say there's a disaster happening, there's a flooding in Semarang, in the local neighborhood, who has the best network in those neighborhoods? It's probably the local mosque or the local religious organization that has the best coverage of all the people in the neighborhood. And it's, let's say, a low-level organization. So these organizations are typically able to deliver aid at the right place rather than only delivering aid at the city level or at the municipality level. They can actually deliver aid at the neighborhood level because they have the volunteers, the people in place at those levels. The third advantage is faith-based organizations typically have a large network and have good ability to raise funds and mobilize volunteers. Because they're so embedded in society, so embedded in the neighborhoods, as well as networks with a variety of people. So if you take, let's say, the local mosque, there will be poor people inside, but also rich people. So it's a rich network. It's not only, let's say, a network with similar type of people, but they are based on the same religion rather than based on the same income. Like you would have with your friends, probably your friends are kind of the same people as you are, and same income, same maybe academics as well. Which is different in a religious organization because then you're gathered based on faith rather than based on income or status or social level. The third advantage is that faith-based organizations have a high level of satisfaction by receivers of aid. So it's not only from the side of delivering the aid, but there's an advantage also an advantage on side of receiving aid. Apparently they work well with those who receive aid. So those are the advantages. There's also a number of critiques on faith-based organizations in the literature. So the first major critique is that they proselytize. So they look for new believers, so to say, from different religions or from people who are not religious. And so there's a hidden agenda by many faith-based organizations. They want to not only to help people, but also to convert people. And that's a critique, because that shouldn't be the main aim of the help being delivered, is the idea. Second critique is that they serve their own faith only. That's an idea that some NGOs have. Well, if you work with a faith-based organization, they might work well with other fellow Muslims, but maybe not with Christians, maybe not with other beliefs. And there's actually no evidence that this is true on a large scale. It might sometimes happen on a small scale, let's say with a single organization, or it might have happened. But the literature reports that in general, that's not the case. The third critique is that faith-based organizations are more expensive and less organized because they're not based on profession, but they're based on faith. That's sometimes true, as the literature indicates, and there's scarce evidence that faith-based organizations are a bit more expensive. Yet, not all those expenses are being contributed by sponsors or by donors. They're often funded by their own people rather than by external funding. And the fourth critique is that there's different opinions inside a faith-based organization on illness, life, and death, or also between different organizations. So this is a major point that, for instance, plays in Africa around abortion, where NGOs foster an agenda of women's rights, including abortion, while many faith-based organizations are against such measures. So there's different opinions on illness, life, and death between different organizations. That's definitely true, regardless of what you think of those different opinions. So now I would like to turn to a case of what we call church and community mobilization in the highlands in Papua, where I've been working for a local venture, local foundation, supporting churches, supporting religious organizations in sustainable development. So here you see a picture of one of those villages, remote villages only reachable by air transport or by foot. So imagine there's on the left side of this small village, there's a small airstrip about 400 meters where you can land with let's say a small bush plane. So I'll explain a bit about the program, about what we did, and then turn to a number of observations. So this program, which I was involved in, started in 2015, ran with the biggest church in Papua, the Gidi church. And what we did was bi-monthly training of village facilitators who had the role to train local villagers in community development. And so we trained facilitators who then had to run bi-weekly activities in every congregation or every village. And imagine in those villages, the congregation or the village are actually one-on-one. So there's one congregation per village, and all villagers belong to the same church. And it's a very there's not different churches. There's now no different religions. It's one tribe with one religion. So we run these trainings in 5 different districts: Korupun, Halawun, Lolat, Bokontini, Wamena. Not all of those districts were actually continued, as some of those, especially in the cities, with Wamena as a city. In some cities, people were not really motivated to continue, so we stopped halfway or after a few sessions. In all these areas, government services are broken down or dysfunctioning, so to say. So imagine in this village which you just saw, this is Korupun, There's a local health center, a puskesmas, but typically there's no one available, no government mantries, no government health workers available. So they will live in the health workers will live in the city while the people are in the village. So once a year, twice a year, the doctor comes along he flies in for a few days and then leaves. Same with the local health worker. So there's nothing available in terms of primary health services. Besides what the church is providing. So the government, and same with the Kepala Desa or other officials, they are typically in the city and not in the village. So let's say the government representation in the village is really weak, and typically absent, so to say. So what are the key observations or the key mechanisms, as we call it, in the CCM case? So what's the function of the faith-based organization, and how can it contribute to sustainable development of such a village? Because this village is suffering from a number of key problems. First of all, it's very remote. It's hard to reach. It takes a half-hour flight from the city, and it can only be reached by during daytime when the weather is good. So it might be that there's only a flight once a week or once a month. So it's very hard to get supplies, hard to get help if you need. So and as there's no local health workers, typically health problems are big. Same with famine nowadays. Now and then there might be shortage of food or different types of food, and how can you supply the village? Sometimes there's a program, sometimes there's rice flying in, but there's a number of those issues. Same with education. There's a school, but it's barely functioning, barely running. The teachers are often not available. So there's a number of key issues in the village. And so what is the first mechanism that we identified that the faith-based program can do in this case? Well, the first thing is that it functions for joint sense making of the situation. So people blame, let's say, the government for the issues in the village, but that's not so productive, as the government is not going to change on the short term. It's a long-standing problem. It's not an easy thing to deal with. So what people need to realize, and they do through this program, when they talk together, when they sit together, and they have small group interaction, which is the key practice in this program. They engage in joint sense making. So they talk with each other and realize, okay, it's not only my problem, it's our shared problem. And the solution is not easy. It's not like someone is going to provide a solution overnight. So we probably need to think about this ourselves and think, what can we do with what we have available? For instance, one problem which we encountered or with people discussed in this program was they have problems with young people, teenagers living in the cities. Because in the village you have a Sekolah Dasar elementary school, but the SMP is barely functioning. So people move to the cities, kids move to the cities to get education. Well, they're age 12 and up, and this often becomes an issue in the cities, as they're kind of free without control of parents or other family members. So they start to drink, they start to do whatever, but the parents don't really like the behavior of the kids. And so they thought, well, this is an issue and this is a problem. And so by discussing this together, they quickly came to the conclusion, well, why don't we send some parents with them? Why don't we have an asrama in the city, we have a boarding school, yet why don't we also have parents living there at the asrama rather than having kids, on their own, so to say, in the cities. So the first mechanism, joint decision making, through talking to each other. It's a very basic mechanism. The second mechanism that we identified is that's inclusive. So by this program in those local churches and local villages, they included men and women. They included young people. As a pastor said, previously we were mainly focused on the activities of the pastor, and the other groups in the congregation did not have so much a role. Now we involve all groups in the church activities. We, for example, now even have a schedule for Sunday service in which the youth groups, the women's groups, the men's groups get their own tasks, for instance, in praying, leading music, etc. And so it's a big change actually in the society, even though it looks small maybe to us, but women were typically excluded, young people were excluded, let's focus on older men. But now they said, well, why don't we just involve all of them? We already did it throughout the week in those discussions. We can also do it in our own regular practices. And especially in the village, there's a majority of women, as many men move to the cities. And so actually it's important to involve women because there's much more people around who are female. The third mechanism is that they realize their own potential through this program, through the involvement and through the discussions. So it changed the dependency attitude of, well, if something's broke, we send a proposal to the government rather than trying to fix it ourselves. That's what they used to do, what they often still do. Let's say the bridge is broken over one of the small rivers, and they send out a proposal to the government to fix it. Well, in the past, before government presence in those villages, which is only quite recent, let's say 30 years or 40 years, they built their own bridges, and they can still do that. So they realize, well, we can wait for 2 years for a bridge, or we build that ourselves. And we can still submit a proposal to get a better bridge. That's still possible, but rather we do something ourselves with what we have, rather than wait and not being able to travel over the river for 2 years. So they start to realize, well, we can actually do something. We can be passive and wait, or we can do something and improve our own situation in the meantime. Through this program involving all people in the village, they get to collaborate planning for action. In the program, this step is not really reached program-wise, but in fact, people already start to collaboratively act, like in the case of the asrama in the city. They decide, well, we send someone and we'll give that family an income, food, whatever they need to take care of our kids. And so through joint discussions, through involving everyone, and there can be collaborative planning for action. And I think especially this final stage is very important for sustainable development. People cannot solve their own problems on their own, but they can do together. They can do it together. It doesn't mean the government has a role, of course, but if the government is absent or not taking decisive action, people have their own power. We are forming the government. It's not like the government is serving the people. Rather, it is like the government is serving the people rather than the government is there doing its own thing. It's people have to realize we can elect our own people, but if they don't perform, we can choose other people, or we can just act on the problems that we see in the meantime. So there's a number of conditions for these mechanisms. So I made a summary of 4 mechanisms that work in this case. And theoretically, mechanisms describe how a certain effect is produced in a particular context. So it's context dependent. And key conditions for these mechanisms are that they work in isolated and relatively traditional and homogeneous societies. Like these villages you show the picture, it's not like a village in Java. It's much more traditional. It's much more isolated. And it's relatively homogeneous. They are members of one and same tribe. They belong to the same church or denomination, so they can really be together, and there's not so much division in terms of different faiths, different tribes, different backgrounds. They're all from the same background, so they have to get together. At the same time, there's all kind of issues playing a role, of course, in such a village where there's family fights and everything is also happening there. So it's not like it's perfect society. It's definitely not. So these are the two main conditions. So let me get to a summary of the review and the case findings. So there's a number of advantages of involving faith-based organizations in sustainable development, especially on a local level. So there's higher levels of motivation, and that's supported by the evidence and seems to be present in the CCM case as well. The second advantage is, well, faith-based organizations can provide aid at the right place, which is supported by evidence in the literature. And we see it also in the CCM case. The third advantage is, well, FBOs have a large network and are and have a good ability to raise funds and mobilize volunteers. It's again supported by the evidence and the literature, and it doesn't seem so much to play a role in the CCM case, as their networks are limited, but they have sufficient volunteers in fact. The fifth advantage is, well, there's high levels of satisfaction by the receiver of aid, which is supported by the literature, and we also see it in the CCM program. There's a number of disadvantages. Proselytizing is supported by the literature, but we didn't see that in our case, as actually in this case all people were already members of that church, so it didn't play a role. And this second disadvantage is that people serve their own faith only, which is not supported by literature and is again not applicable in our case, as the entire village already belongs to the same faith. So there's not a case of serving other people of different faiths, even though sometimes there's, let's say, people from outside in the village, and they are perfectly taken care of, in my experience. So it seems that there's not such this disadvantage, in fact, does not play a role. The third disadvantage is, well, faith-based organizations are more expensive and less organized. There's some support by the literature, and what we see when we compare the CCM program to government programs, the CCM program is definitely less expensive, as many of the costs are informal, so to say, so that you don't have to pay for food or for housing, for other things that the government would have to do, or other NGOs would have to do. Finally, there's disadvantage of different opinions regarding illness, life, and death, which is supported by the literature, but is not applicable in this case, as the CCM team as well as CCM donors share the same opinion. So differences in opinions don't play a role. So what's the potential for aid through FBOs? Well, there's positive factors: strong infrastructure of churches and mosques in the entire population, which belong to the main faith groups, and the government's infrastructure is very weak in remote areas. So in that case, the FBOs have a big role to play in any type of sustainable development. There's two risk factors as well, that entanglement of faith and government can actually increase corruption, which is a very big issue, as you may know, in Papua. And corruption plays a role, particularly in the government. But if government and faith-based organizations get intertwined, the corruption easily spills over to the faith-based organizations, including all the politics from the government. And it might foster tension between faith groups if faith groups get a big role in sustainable development. It might be seen as a kind of a competition for people for getting converts, getting influence or getting power. And so it might lead to tension, and that's something to be aware of, that is a potential risk, and which has happened in the past. So for future research, definitely need to do research among different faith groups. And as I said, I'm currently supervising a PhD student in Surabaya, who's studying a couple of different faith groups and their involvement in local sustainable development. And we need to further explore key mechanisms and processes to understand how FBOs produce their results. So not only focusing on advantages or disadvantages, but actually go a step deeper and say, well, how is it that they can get to the positive results that we see in the literature? Sorry, I clicked the wrong slide. Well, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments in the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Vanberg, for your presentation. As we all heard, he observed the faith-based organization in remote area in Papua. He identified the strength and the critics of faith-based organization and used the example of how church and community mobilization doing in remote area of Papua, and try to change the attitudes from dependent community to independent community, heading to self-reliant community as a part of sustainable development. Okay, all participants, I think during the presentation there has been interaction between participants and speaker through chatting, but we still have about 35-minute time to discussion. I cordially invite the participant to raise question, comment, notes to the speaker, mention your name and institution, and please mention who you will. For those who already raise question through chatting and you feel that you haven't been responded by speaker, you can also raise question directly. So for those who would like to raise question, please raise your hand and mention your name, your institution. Please now. No more question?
Yeah, Prof.
Yes, please. Yes. Mention your name and your institution, and to whom your question be addressed.
Terima kasih, Prof. My name
Silakan, Pak.
is
Pak
my
Poniman,
name is
Mr.
Poniman
Poniman.
of Indonesian Agriculture Environment Research Institute. pertanyaan. Good afternoon, Mr. Yudi,
Yeah.
Regional Representative of South ASEAN. I agree that agriculture has risen furthest on the crisis. The agriculture economic crisis has proven to be rising quickly and carefully. COVID-19 has also been proven by agriculture products that remain in surplus. Specifically for rice duck, how will IRI deal with food need in 2030 apa Mas? Mas Kacil.
Oh, to the same.
Sebagai in term of variety. Rice is also known to product methane, whether it in the assembly of varieties and has also been assembled in that direction. What about pesticide management to control for organism from pesticide plant? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Poniman. Dr. Yurdi, did you catch the point of question raised by Mr. Poniman? Pak Yurdi, are you still there? Are you still with us, Dr. Yurdi? Pak Yurdi? Oh, okay. Maybe he's still somewhere. Mr. Poniman, we will wait for Dr. Yurdi. We hope he come back again and be with us. Are there any questions from the participant? For the colleague?
Anu gak iso ketok ya Mas. Apa videoku gak iso mlebu ya ketok ya.
Okay, let me ask to Professor Professor Airku. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the components of sustainable development that you observe about how the faith-based organization do community development in remote area of Papua? What component of sustainable development? You mentioned that your research is part of sustainable development.
Yeah. So I think the main role of those, well, the program I was involved in is focused on community resilience. So how local communities can sustain themselves, so to say, as living in those areas is hard. Actually, also in terms of bigger environmental goals, let's say water consumption and waste and CO2 production, it's actually good if those communities sustain themselves rather than move to cities. As their local farming style is much more sustainable than let's say the big large scale food production. They live in areas that are hardly inhabited. They maintain that area. Well, they of course there's a bit of destruction going on if there's a village in, let's say, a forest area, but it's not like a big deforestation. It's just subsistence farming, subsistence living, which is in itself a sustainable way of living. So I think if we can keep those communities intact, it's better for the environment rather than if they move to cities and become part of the bigger issues that cities have to deal with. So I think that the goal of such a program could be to focus on community resilience on a village level, and rather than let's say move those villages to a modern type of farming, try to support a subsistence farming, but get it improved by that it of course delivers enough nutrition for the population, but that will need support, or will need strong communities that know how to deal with the issues of their situation, not become, let's say, a victim of the system, but they often feel we are victims of the malfunctioning government system. Well, they don't have to see it that way. They can see, well, we can actually deal with it ourselves rather than see the government as a solution to everything.
Okay. So it's a local community-based development, something like that.
Yeah. Right.
Heading to self-reliant community, resilience community.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. Any other question from the participant before I invite each speaker to give closing remark? Okay. I would like to give opportunity to Priska. Okay, please, Priska.
Good afternoon, ladies, Mr. Prof. Sudarto, and
yes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have a question for Professor Airku.
Yes.
It's really interesting topic for me. I want to ask about. Okay. I want to ask about how far. What do you think? How far the government roles in your area of research? Like, yeah. Is it clear enough?
So the question is, what's the role of the government in that area?
Yeah, how far the government? How far the government do their part for the community in your research area? Yeah, that's all from me.
Yeah, it's actually a relevant question. I also commented a bit on that in my presentation as well. In these areas in Papua, the government is, especially in village level, the government is not really performing well, so to say, in delivering basic services. And due to all kinds of reasons, corruption involved, there's political fights, etc. So it's typically the local government let's say on the region level, Kabupaten level has to be blamed for that. But still, the government is doing something, and the programs are there. But the delivery of government services is typically weak or absent. So that's where faith-based organizations or any type of local organization can fulfill an important role to strengthen local communities to deal with their own issues. And people have to realize that they have the potential to do so, that they can solve a lot of problems themselves, not everything, but there's a lot of things they can do. And if they act, if they stand up for their own communities, that's already a big help. You can ask for services rather than only wait for services. That's also something that people have to realize. Well, we can elect our own people. We can say, well, if our Kepala Desa is not performing, we ask for another one. And there's mechanisms for that. So that's kind of the interaction between government and local communities that has to be strengthened. And I think that's also beneficial for both. So also the government is doing better if local communities actually stand up for their rights and for what they need to have. At the same time, the faith-based organizations can fulfill an important role in strengthening local communities and kind of developing those solutions together.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Prita, and thank you for the response, Professor Van Berg. There is a question now from Adian. Adian Koironi, please raise your question.
Yes,
Adian.
thank you. Thank you, Prof. Darto. Yeah, this question is for Prof. Jerry Miller. Actually, he's already give some answer by group chat, but just for this answer, I would like to ask about the yeah, my name is Adian. In the past 4 years, I have focused on microplastic research, but I still have a problem till now when I have to identify microplastic in the aquatic system, also in sediments. To distinguish for the microplastic in the form of fragment or fibers is difficult when we have to resemble such as with the dead algae or other fragmented dead marine biota. Actually, I use also FTIR and verification first with the under microscope, but still the result is not satisfied me because for the microplastic or nanoplastic in the small size, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to analyze with FTIR or even just to take analyze under a microscope. Maybe you have some idea for this such a problem. Thank you.
Professor Miller, please.
Yes, I'm not sure I have a good answer for you. We're struggling with the same problem, and I think a number of investigators have had this issue of trying to separate out microplastics, particularly fibers, from organic matter. We have been exploring the use of using hydrogen peroxide treatment on the sediments prior to analysis to essentially burn off a lot of the organics. But we're not completely sure that it's not affecting the very small fibers as well. And so I think that's still up in the air. We have not been using spectroscopy to analyze the microplastics. We've been doing it primarily by just by microscope separation after sediment, various types of sediment digestions. So in a nutshell, I really don't have any good answers for you on that. It's a difficult problem that I think we're going to have to address as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other question from the participant? If not, I would like to invite every speaker to give a closing remark. Your closing remark can be related to sustainable development goals or the comment question given by the participant. I would like to invite Professor Miller first to give closing remark, please.
Yes, well, again, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for putting this conference together. I know how much work virtual conferences are, and it's been a pleasure to be able to participate in the discussion, both around water and a whole variety of issues related to sustainability goals. So I think trying to develop sustainable goals, particularly with regards to the environment, water is going to be a key element, whether it's trying to maintain a water quality or maintain water quantity, and then how we are able to use that both in agriculture and industry and for domestic purposes are key components. So I don't have any profound things to add here to the conference. I think this has been a way to get the discussion going. And I think over the next day and a half here, there's going to be a lot of presentations, a lot of thought-provoking ideas that will come to the forefront.
Okay, thank you, Professor Miller. I think it's very good and valuable closing remark for us to continue our group discussion later. Now I would like to invite Professor Jel to give a closing remark. Professor Jel, please.
Many thanks, Professor Siddhartha. I think the talks this morning integrated very well into a broad theme. So I congratulate the organisers on selection of speakers and look forward to seeing everybody have the opportunity to present on to a very exciting students are looking forward to present their work. A brief message from me would be environmental problems. It's a very exciting lot to do. A brief message: if we plan our future, address issues which are urgent, embark upon low regret solutions while we're conducting research to understand and provide evidence for the longer term solutions that we might roll out into the future. It's critical that we plan, and so we're prepared for what's coming. Much of the climate change evidence is fairly solid now, so we can see the sorts of scenarios we face in 10, 20, 30 years into the future. But we need to prepare now, because we've taken a long time to degrade the planet as much as we have. It's going to take us a long time to repair it, but we need to start planning now. So thank you very much again to all the organisers, and congratulations to our speakers this morning.
Thank you, Professor Jel. Now I would like to invite Dr. Yurti Yasmi. Are you still there, Dr. Yurti? Dr. Yurti, I think he already left. Now I would like to invite Dr. Liu Kian Heng. Dr.
Yes,
Liu, please,
Thank
Pak.
you,
Yes, please. Yeah,
thank
yes.
You, Pak.
Clear.
Thank you, Pak Hato and Pak Hadianto, for this invitation. Singapore and Indonesia, as well as our very neighboring country, Malaysia, we always like to work closely together. So I hope we could have more collaborations, not only on water, of course, on rice and so on and so forth. And I would like to invite any of your PhD students who would like to do any thesis or do some researches in Singapore. I can host them, because I do take in internship and I take in mentees for 3 to 6 months or a year program. Keep that in mind, because right now a lot of my local university, NUS and NTU students, or even some from Australia, University of Sydney, they come to my organization to undertake some programs. So I think this is some area I think we could strengthen this relationship as much as possible. In fact, I must gladly say that some Indonesian students who were studying in NUS for their PhD undertook some aquaculture projects with me, and he took back this so-called learning, and he used it on his own farm. He became an entrepreneur, and now he's also a millionaire. So it is time for us to visit him too. He's also somewhere close to Semarang. So we hope together, Semarang and Singapore, we must work together closely. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak. Thank you for insightful presentation and also nice offer. We would love to learn about your living laboratory. And the last one, I would like to invite Professor Airku to give a closing remark, please.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you as the organizers, Professor Suharto and Professor Hadianto, for inviting me. it's a pity that we could not meet physically in Semarang. To have loved to. I was actually joking yesterday to my kids, saying, "Well, I'm going to Indonesia tomorrow, and they would love to follow me, as we lived there for 6 years, of course."
Okay.
So, but yeah, I hope to meet somewhere in the future.
Okay.
I've actually already been collaborating with Pa Hadianto for about 10 years now, so definitely look forward to meet again. But it's nice to see so many people now virtually present here, which is amazing. That we can gather this way, and I would really like to applaud you as the organizers to putting this together and making this work, sharing insights and through virtual channels that we have available. And I see many rich things come together this way, and I believe that the only way for sustainable development is that we really work together, multi-disciplinary. And it's we cannot solve this with our own discipline. We cannot solve this with my background in organization studies only. We need to solve this with insights in water management, waste management, and other solutions, other tools, other techniques that we need. And I really look forward to different presentations over the next couple of days to see what we get together. And I would like to invite everyone to learn also from different perspectives. So to take that home and see, well, we don't only need our technical tools, we also need to organize it to make it work with our local communities as well as with the higher levels of government. And that would be my main takeaway of this meeting, that we need to collaborate on different levels between different disciplines to get this solved. As this is not only a local problem, not only our own disciplinary problem, but this is a worldwide problem for entire humanity. And we need to deal with these issues together and make it work.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Airku. And for all speakers, we look forward to working with you in the near future. And thank you for insightful presentation. Thank you also for discussion with all participants, both through chatting and through direct discussion. I hope it will be useful and fruitful for us. So keep safe and healthy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me give back the time to MC. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Stephanie,
Yes,
time is
yes.
yours now.
Okay, thank you. We are delighted to say thank you for all our keynote speakers who have shared their valuable experiences in research. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's about to start the next session, which is parallel session. We've provided you 8 meeting rooms in Zoom, and each of you will join the meeting room based on the given information listed in your schedule. So please check your parallel room in the schedule and join your meeting room after this. I also would like to remind you that there will be an awarding for the top 3 presenters and top 3 papers, so make sure that all of the participants perform well during your presentation, as you might get the chance to win this. Lastly, don't forget to join the parallel session at 12:45 p.m. after the break. Please be punctual. Thank you for paying attention, and you may have your